The ranch house stood lonely against the endless prairie, its weathered boards groaning as the wind swept across the land. Samuel, a widowed rancher hardened by years of labor, was returning from the fields when he noticed something slumped against his front gate. At first, he thought it was the wind tossing fabric or a stray traveler resting. But as he drew near, he saw the figure of a young woman collapsed in the dust, her arms clutching a tiny bundle wrapped in faded cloth. His heart jolted, for in her embrace lay a baby, weak and whimpering with hunger. The woman's hair was tangled with dust, her dress torn at the seams, her lips cracked from thirst. When Samuel knelt beside her, she lifted her face, hollow with fear, and whispered hoarsely, "Don't touch me, I'm broken." Her words cut through him like a knife. She was too weak to fight, yet her voice carried the weight of battles unseen. Samuel said nothing. His rough hands, scarred from rope and plow, moved slowly, not to frighten her. He lifted the baby gently, then helped the woman to her feet with quiet care. His silence spoke louder than any promise. He guided her inside the ranch house, the old wooden floor creaking under their weary steps. She leaned against the wall, clutching her child, her eyes darting about as if she feared the walls themselves might betray her. Samuel stoked the dying embers in the hearth, coaxing a small flame to life. From the pantry, he gathered what little food he had: stale bread, a jar of beans, and a strip of dried meat. He didn't speak, only placed the meal before her. She hesitated, suspicion flickering in her gaze, before hunger overcame pride. Slowly she began to eat. Samuel watched in silence, not out of pity, but out of understanding. He too had once sat where she now sat, hollow, broken, stripped of everything. His wife's face rose unbidden in his mind, her laughter now just a ghost carried on the wind. Death had stolen her in childbirth, leaving him alone in this house of wood and silence. Watching the woman cradle her baby by the fire, Samuel felt something stir, a reminder of pain, yes, but also of purpose. He did not ask her name, nor where she had come from. In the Wild West, questions could be knives. The baby cried softly, its small fists trembling in the air. The woman tried to soothe the child, but her arms shook with exhaustion. Samuel reached out, but she flinched, her eyes flashing with mistrust. He withdrew, offering no protest. Instead, he fetched a kettle, filled it with water, and set it to boil. The warmth of the fire filled the cabin, wrapping them in fragile mercy. She held her baby tighter, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Outside, coyotes howled across the prairie, their cries blending with the lonely wind. Inside, Samuel simply sat nearby, his presence a quiet shield. As night deepened, shadows stretched long across the cabin walls. The woman dozed fitfully, clutching her baby, as though the world might steal him away. Samuel remained awake, sharpening his old knife by lantern light, though his eyes often drifted toward her. He knew the risks. Harboring strangers could bring trouble. She might be running from men worse than wolves, and they could come hunting. Yet when she whispered earlier, "Don't touch me, I'm broken," he had seen more than fear. He had seen the reflection of his own grief, and though he hadn't spoken, he had made a decision. He would protect them. At dawn, Samuel rose early, slipping quietly outside. The prairie stretched wide and golden, but danger was always near. He scanned the horizon for dust trails that might mean riders, but all was still. Returning inside, he found the woman awake, rocking her child with weary arms. She avoided his gaze, her voice low as she said, "You don't know what I've done." Samuel poured her a tin cup of water and simply replied, "Don't matter." His tone was steady, not dismissive but firm with understanding. In a land ruled by cruelty, he offered something rare, judgment withheld. Her eyes widened at his words, as if mercy was harder to accept than cruelty. She pressed her lips together, then whispered, "They called me ruined, said I was nothing but shame." She looked away, her shoulders trembling as the baby whimpered against her chest. Samuel leaned against the wall, his hat in his hands, and said nothing. He knew words could bruise worse than fists, and she had likely heard enough of them. Instead, he nodded toward the hearth where the fire still glowed. "Stay warm," he murmured softly. His quiet presence filled the silence she no longer feared. As the hours passed, Samuel repaired a broken fence post outside, his hands steady, his gaze always drifting back to the house. Through the open window, he could see the woman slowly rocking her baby. She still guarded herself, her posture stiff, yet there was less panic in her eyes. The prairie sun climbed higher, beating down with its merciless heat, but Samuel felt a strange coolness within. He had given up expecting companionship long ago. Yet now, within his cabin walls, life had returned in fragile form, a broken woman and her child, breathing hope back into a lonely ranch. By evening, the prairie was painted in gold. Samuel returned inside, dust clinging to his boots. The woman sat by the fire, her child asleep at last in her lap. For the first time, she met Samuel's gaze without flinching. Her voice was little more than a breath when she said, "Thank you." He tipped his hat, offering no reply, only a quiet nod. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of survival, of unspoken grief, and of mercy shared between two souls who understood brokenness. Outside, the west roared. Inside, peace was born. The cabin was wrapped in silence, broken only by the restless whimpers of the baby. The young mother sat curled near the hearth, her back turned, shoulders shaking as if she bore a shame too heavy to name. Samuel watched quietly from his chair, hat resting on his knee. He had seen battle-hardened men weep after losing everything, but this grief was softer, more fragile, carved deep into her bones. When the child cried louder, the mother covered her face with trembling hands, whispering broken words. Samuel stood slowly, crossing the creaking floor with the steady patience of a rancher. He reached for the baby, but hesitated, not wishing to startle her. The woman looked up, tears streaking her dusty cheeks, and her arms loosened. Samuel took the child gently, his rough hands turning tender as he cradled the small body against his chest. The baby fussed, tiny fists pushing against his shirt, but Samuel rocked him with practiced care, swaying in rhythm with the quiet hum of the wind outside. The woman watched, frozen in disbelief. This rancher, scarred, silent, worn by the land, offered no pity, no judgment, only the steady hands of a man who had once loved. As the firelight flickered across the cabin walls, Samuel walked slow circles, humming under his breath. It wasn't a lullaby, but the sound of the prairie itself, the rhythm of hooves, the whisper of wheat, the steady pulse of survival. The baby's cries softened into whimpers, then faded into the steady breathing of sleep. Samuel laid him carefully in a makeshift cradle near the hearth. The mother wiped her tears with the corner of her sleeve, her gaze fixed on Samuel with a mixture of awe and confusion. She had expected cruelty, commands, maybe even scorn. Instead, she found silence that healed. When Samuel returned to his chair, he said nothing, simply tending to the fire. The woman's lips parted, as if words wanted to escape, but she closed them again, guarding her heart. Samuel didn't press. He had learned long ago that some wounds cannot be touched with questions. They only heal with time and space. He kept the cabin warm, brewed a small pot of coffee from his dwindling supplies, and pushed the tin cup toward her. She accepted it. With both hands trembling still, for a long time, they sat in the crackling quiet. Two broken souls bound by mercy. The prairie night stretched endlessly, coyotes singing to the moon, wind brushing against the cabin like a restless spirit. Samuel leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, but remained half awake, always ready. The woman, still clutching her cup, stared into the fire as though it might reveal her future. At last she spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. "He's all I have left." Samuel opened his eyes, studied her face, and gave a single nod. No words of comfort, no empty promises. Just acknowledgement, the kind that carried more weight than speeches. The kind that said, "I understand." Toward dawn the baby stirred, whimpering again. Samuel rose before the mother could, lifting the child with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size. He paced the floor, rocking the child back into quiet. The mother watched, her expression slowly softening, the rigid wall of mistrust beginning to crack. She whispered softly, almost to herself. Maybe I'm not as broken as I thought. Samuel paused, glanced at her, and tipped his hat with quiet solemnity. No one is, he said. It was the only answer he could give, the only truth he knew. It settled deep into her heart. When sunlight spilled across the plains, painting the world gold, Samuel opened the cabin door to the day. The mother stepped outside. Her baby nestled close, breathing in the crisp air. For the first time, her shoulders didn't sag under invisible weight. She stood taller, though still fragile, like grass bending after a storm. Samuel busied himself with chores, feeding the horse, checking the fence, but his eyes lingered on her, measuring the change. She seemed surprised by the sight of wide sky without fear, as if freedom itself felt new. Hope flickered faintly, fragile but real in that golden light. Throughout the day, Samuel offered her work to keep her mind steady. She helped grind corn, fetch water from the creek, and mend a torn blanket. Small tasks, simple but grounding. Each time she finished, she looked at him as though expecting criticism, but he gave none, only quiet nods of approval. The baby gurgled happily in his cradle, soothed by the warmth of the fire. The woman's laughter came unexpectedly, a short sound quickly smothered by her hand. Yet Samuel noticed. He didn't mention it, didn't call it out. He simply kept working, though in his chest something unbroken stirred. By evening, when the prairie cooled under violet skies, Samuel returned from the barn to find her humming softly to the baby. The melody was faint, carrying both sorrow and sweetness. She stopped when she saw him, her face flushing with embarrassment. But Samuel tipped his hat and said simply, "Sounds right." She blinked, surprised by the compliment, and looked back to her child with new courage. For the first time since she had collapsed at his gate, the cabin did not feel haunted by sorrow. It felt like a home, fragile, temporary perhaps, but alive with the warmth of survival. That night, as Samuel lay in his bedroll near the hearth, he listened to the soft breaths of mother and child. He thought of his late wife, of the child he had lost before ever holding. Grief pressed heavy, yet instead of crushing him, it connected him to the woman's pain. Perhaps that was why he had said nothing when she called herself broken, because he knew silence sometimes held more strength than words. Mercy was not in speeches. It was in actions, in rocking a child, in keeping the fire alive, in making space for a broken heart to heal.